This is Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast. I am Dr. Canute White. You know, we have been talking to a number of persons over the year. This is 2024. I want you to know that. And, this podcast has been going on for many, many years. Sometime during the COVID period, you know that a lot of people, we start to go online and doing podcasts because we were locked down. You understand the concept. But yes, Canute Exploration, your topic in a podcast. We talked about challenges that persons have been facing. Yes, we bring to you as well some singers, some persons who have been writing for the longest while. Yeah, great authors. But look, I have today someone who will talk to you about writing, her writings, and how it actually it's basically look at social justice and social challenges that people are having. And we'll be talking to this author about how her writings can actually encourage social change. And she has a lot to tell you. Let's bring Juliet into the studio to find out what's going on. Juliet Rose, I like the last name, Rose.
Thank you.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I before we go into the meat of the matter, so to speak, I'd like to find out who are you? Who is Juliet Rose, professionally and personally, if you may?
Sure. So professionally, Juliet Rose is I'm an author. I have currently 9 books out, and I'm writing my 10th. I'm also a publisher and an editor, so I do that on the side, some freelance editing. But most of all, I'm really somebody that wants to use my voice to reach others.
Right, that's great. I love that. I'm not sure if you had watched some of my episodes, but there's a question I always ask because it's important to find out where you're coming from. And my listeners, those on Apple Podcasts also, and other platforms that they get audio, to hear actually where you were and look at where you are now, because it's all about empowering, inspiring my listeners. Tell me about your childhood.
Sure. So I had a pretty rough childhood. I was raised with my mother. She divorced my father when I was little. There was 6 of us children. They split their children. My brother and I were raised with my mother. And at one point she got an RV and we traveled around the country into Mexico. And then when I was 11, she passed away from cancer, and I kind of shifted, to different homes until I eventually moved out on my own when I was 16.
Right. Condolence from Canute Exploration. I know it can be hard. My mother passed away as well, and it can be difficult when mothers pass. But look, you're going to be talking to us about your writings. But you said something, I read it somewhere, about your writing blending social issues into your fictional writing. Talk to me about that. What do you mean, blending social issues into your fictional writings?
Yeah, so early on, I was a nonfiction writer. I wrote for magazines and I wrote for newspapers, and I kind of covered different kind of issues in the world. And then eventually I felt like I was kind of hitting the same people over and over again, because I felt like people that read nonfiction tend to gravitate towards what they're already comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to expand kind of like that exposure. And so I realized that writing a fiction story and having your characters go through certain social issues helps reach a much broader audience, because people are coming to it for a good story. And through that good story, they may change their perspective or grow their heart or whatever it is. So I think it's really important to, at least for me, when I write, is to really share something pertinent about our world and what people are going through in that story.
Interesting. We know about satire. I did literature in high school. It was for me okay, but sometimes you wonder how these authors, these writers, represent things that had happened before in history, or social events, trending issues that they bring out to others through their writings, and it's something that you are doing and you want to do, because we sometimes write. I'm also a writer, right? We write, and those who are singers, they sing what they experience, what's going on in the world, and I love that. But You also suggested somewhere that your writing should trigger different perspectives, and I'd want to know how your writings. Maybe you have alluded to that in what you've just said, but to clarify, how your writings actually, will bring about social change. Can we take up your books and read your books, and it will affect not only changes in us as an individual reader, but in our society, in our communities.
Yeah, and I think that what happens, I think when we're raised with a lot of kind of our parents' belief systems or belief systems of people around us, and so we tend to look at those as factual, and we don't necessarily step outside of that zone to expose ourselves to maybe a different perspective. And so what I try to do in the story is give that different perspective. So maybe the reader was raised to believe that homeless people are lazy. Well, I want to give a perspective that maybe they're not, that this is somebody that's down on their luck, that this is somebody that's gone through some things, maybe they need a better support system. And so that's my goal in doing this, is to really say, what are some common kind of thought patterns people have about certain things? And let me give you a different perspective by creating a warm and loving character you want to connect to.
Yeah, yeah. And Juliet, that is important, because if you're right and you're not trying to encourage a different perspective, try to elicit sort of a reflection on what's going on, then why writing, right? So I love that. And what motivates you, though? I mean, it's perhaps what you have just said is a sort of a motivation. But besides that, what are some of the motivation factors? Who are some of the motivating people in your life that create this sort of writing?
Yeah, so I think that what really motivates me is, I was somebody that when I would watch the news and I would just feel sad. I would feel very discouraged. Like, how can I change things? What does it matter? And so a lot of my motivation comes from that ability to maybe try to change things. Like, I'm trying to, instead of standing on a pedestal and saying, you should do this, I'm saying, consider this. And so that really is where my motivation came from, was my own frustration about the world, about suffering, and how I felt like I could try to make a difference.
Yeah. And making a difference is important. I'd like to talk about some of your books, though. If you could also show them, let us see what some of your books look like, and basically, tell us about each of them.
Sure. So I have a few. I only have 3 of the 10 books that I have with me, but I thought they were 3 important books for what we're talking about. So I'll start with this one. This one is called We Don't Matter. And it's about a group of friends who witnesses police brutality, and they get it on camera and are on the run because they have this footage of what happens. And so they come to a point as a group of friends where they realize they have to stand up and speak out about what happened, otherwise it won't change. And so that's this book. I have this book called Prick of the Needle, which is about a woman who was a heroin addict, and she got arrested and put in prison. And through the prison system, she started working with the wildland firefighting program, so where they use prisoners to fight wildfires. Got out, became a supervisor. So this story gets a lot into like what it's like to have an addiction and to try to find your place in the world and make a change yourself. There's that one. And then the third one I brought in with me is Carrying the Dead. And this gets a lot into like generational trauma and not knowing, really where we come from and why we do the things that we do. So this main character has to go on a journey to find out some secrets that are haunting her, that things keep coming up. And so she takes a trip into Mexico, and through their culture and through her experiences there, she's able to uncover the secret. And using that, she's able to then help other people.
Okay, I like that. I like that. You have mentioned 3 books here, but tell me, are you present in any of these books? Are you in them? Which of these books are you in?
That's tough, because I think as a writer, you're kind of in all of them. There's aspects of you put into those characters, especially your main characters, because that's their perspective. However, I would say I have 2 books that I wrote that I have characters that I so align with. One of them is that first one I showed you, We Don't Matter. the main character, Aiden, who is the film student who captures that, really was me and my frustration about the world in a character. I really said, I really want to make a difference. These are things that frustrate me. I need to give voice to it. And so I created that character, and I'm very, very bonded to that character. One of my other characters in a book called In Dreams We Fly is a little girl whose mother passes from cancer, and she goes to live with family in North Carolina. And that's very similar to what happened to me as a child. Obviously, it goes off the rails and there's a whole story. But a lot of what she goes through, her feelings, her grief, is me when I was that age.
No. Tell me, when I do podcasts, I listen to my podcast, even a couple months down the road. I will listen to this one again, because I learn from my podcast as well, right? I will listen to my guests, and learn something new. Tell me, you read your books. Let me ask that. Do you read your own books?
It's
manuscript, that initial manuscript.
It's funny because I think when you first write it, you're writing it as a writer, but then when you're going back through to read it, you're reading it as an editor. And so I tend to not pick them back up and read them because I just criticize myself immediately. Like, I should have done this, I should have done that. So not once I'm past that stage, I don't usually read them.
I know, I understand the concept, because again, when you read your books, you say, hey, I should have done that, I should have, but again, you also get some insight because you're reading your books now as, quote unquote, a reader. Let me put it that way, right? And not an author. So you get new, because you can teach yourself through your writing.
You can, because when you write it and then you come back later and read it, sometimes you go, oh, I wrote that. That's actually, that taught me something. So you definitely get to that when you go back and you come across a passage that really speaks to you. And there's definitely a sense of pride that passage speaks to you as a reader who wrote it.
What would you like to say to young writers, though? That little girl watching, let me say girl, because you're a female. So what would you say to that little girl watching who wants to be a writer, who watching you and say, I'd love to be like her? What type of encouragement, what type of first step would you do?
My one thing I tell everybody is ignore all the rules and just write. Like, don't worry about what the proper thing is here, or you should do it this way, you shouldn't do it. Just write. Whatever that story is in your heart, write it down. You can always come back to it as many times as you need to, but you really need to get it down on paper first.
Yeah, I like you said that. But talk to me about this, because sometimes when we write self, the pain, we sort of write the pain that we are feeling. Is it something that will hurt you and you tend to, hey, I don't want to do this anymore? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. I lost a child when I was in my 20s. And after I lost her, I went through this, the year of kind of grief where you're just grieving and you can't really function. And then after that year, I said to myself, I'm stuck here a really long time. So I need to learn to embrace the pain and use that for voice. And that's really where I did with my stories, is I said, what have I been through that I could share with people that could help them maybe through their pain? So while it can be painful, and it is, I've definitely cried writing my stories, it's important that we share, that pain.
Yeah. It's critical that we share that pain. And in sharing the pain, we feel it, Juliet. We feel that pain. And perhaps we don't want to go any further with this writing. I hate the pain. I'm not writing anymore on this. But you persevere, and you said, hey, I'm going to be writing this, especially the book that brings out this cancer, in a person with cancer and so on. So how that makes you feel as a writer? Is it that you have shifted your thought process in order to get it done?
Yeah. And, sometimes you do have to put the pen down for a moment, maybe work on a different chapter and then come back to that. But it's really important to be authentic. So instead of rushing through that pain or trying to gloss over it, if it's too much, put it aside, do something else and come back to it. Even if it takes you weeks to just keep that one little section going, be truthful, be authentic. Readers need to hear that.
Yeah. What's your plan for further writing? Do you have anything to you're looking at, any project that you're looking at?
Yeah, I do some freelance editing, so I keep myself definitely busy with that. But I'm done with my 10th novel, and it's just going through the editing phase right now, and that comes out the end of next month. Our publishing house just expanded to bring on other authors, so I have another author's book coming out this month that I did the editing and thanks for. We also have an anthology we're working on where we brought other writers in. So I really like to stay busy, obviously, and get all this done. And then eventually I have other stories of mine I'd like to work on later in the year. But my focus right now is to get these 2 books in the anthology out this spring.
Yeah. You know, you're in the United States, right?
I am. Mm-hmm.
And you know, I'm reaching out from New York now, but
Okay.
I realized that, and listening to the news and reading, you know, I realize a lot of murder, suicide. Well, murder is something that we see a lot of, right? But suicide, you know, and so on, and we wonder, when will this stop? You and I, as authors, podcasters, you know, your you know, be it host or guest, how can we target this group of people who are depressed, challenged mentally, and perhaps want to take their life? I've read husbands, wives killing family members and killing self just over the past couple of weeks. I've been reading that 2 or 3 cases. How do we stop that? How do we help? How do you help?
You know, a couple of things. I think what we're doing right now helps. Having these communications, talking openly about it. You know, we live in a world where with social media, people tend to prefer to see positive things all the time. So people are putting on a show of who they are, what they're going through, you know, often hiding their pain. I think it's really important to encourage people to not hide their pain, you know, to let them know there's no stigma in speaking out about what they're going through and to ask for help. Once we destigmatize, you know, mental health, then I think we'll have a lot of people who feel comfortable, just like they would if they had strep throat and they went to the doctor. They'll feel more comfortable, you know, speaking openly and then getting help for what they're going through.
Right. That's important. I must say, I mean, I am not advertising for Apple now, but I realize the iPhone, there is a new, there's an update, right? That I actually updated my phone just recently as well, and there's a journaling app that you know, automatically came, you know, on the phone through the update, and it encourages people to journal, do some journaling, and there are suggestions as it relates to how to journal, write about, you know, the things that you have achieved last week, the best thing that you have experienced, and so on. And I think that's a good way, Juliet, to actually encourage people to deal with mental challenges, to deal with issues that they're going through, right? And that's cool. You know, I see the light in the darkness coming.
Yes, my light keeps turning off on me.
Cool, that's cool, right? And you have, you know, that's a good illustration. The light in the darkness, you know, the journaling. And I'm saying this to say that sometimes our writings, your writing, need to be that light in the darkness. Talk to me.
Absolutely. I think if we, you know, whether it's in writing or through our own actions, if we are honest about pain and we're honest about what we've endured and how we've come through it, it encourages people to feel the same way. So, you know, speaking out obviously is important, but writing, and like I said, when you do fiction writing, it creates a little bit of a buffer, I think, for people to feel more comfortable. They don't feel quite like blasted in the face about that social issue or situation, but through reading this character going through something and how they've solved it, it makes them feel like maybe there's another option.
Right. Yeah. I one of the book that I've read, Animal Farm. I'm not sure if you ever read that.
I did. Yeah.
I mean, that satire is so interesting, you know. And I keep reading it even after high school. And a number of Shakespeare is not my favorite person. It's somewhat too difficult to understand the Shakespearean writing, but we get with it. Who's your favorite writer, or writers for that matter?
I really love Octavia Butler. I think that not only in the style of her writing, she writes very fluid and relatable, but she also, you know, covers some really tough subjects. She gets into dystopian subjects, and she gets into slavery, and she gets into things that, you know, some people shied away from, and she does it in a way that you're really invested with that character in their story. And I really love her writing for that reason. I read a lot. I mean, to me, it's really just about whether or not a story speaks to me. So I might read something from an author and love it, and then read something else by the same author and not love it. So a lot of times it's just like that particular book. Like I read this book called A Monster Calls, and it's about a little boy whose mother is dying of cancer. And he basically creates this monster that comes to his house and walks him through these stories to help him cope with his grief and his guilt. And I love that story because it's one of those stories where you could tell the author was familiar with those experiences and really could just show this child's, you know, experience in a way that was so relatable.
Yeah, interesting. I I'm from the Caribbean, Jamaica, and the Caribbean writers, you hear the Caribbean within the writing, right? I sound like a Trinidadian just now. But yeah. So we speak patois, our dialect in Jamaica, right? What I go on, where I say man and so on. But if you write that and people read it, they'll be reading Jamaican, they'll be reading the Caribbean, right? But my thing is that when you write, do you change you try to write colloquial, so to speak, dialect, or do you try to be standard English, so to speak? Talk to me.
So I typically stick with standard English. If I use dialect, I use it lightly to show something, but I don't want the book to be written in dialect, because for me, that often takes me out of a story, because I'm trying to figure out what someone's saying instead of just reading it. And so I usually do that, but I'll throw in a few words, maybe like I had an Irish character, and the Irish end a lot of sentences with a question. And so I did include that kind of style to show that, but I didn't get into like the accent in the writing.
No, right? You know, so that's where I wanted was to go with that, because the accent in the writing, you know, sometimes comes out. You know, I've read several books, you know, and I you can hear that. You know, I think I read a book, and it's a Trinidadian that had written that book. And there's a chapter in it that speaks to the madman, and the way the author actually described and actually portrayed that individual, that character speaking, you know, you say, oh, this is a different language, this is something else, and you see the culture coming out.
Yeah, I think it's a balance of making sure you're including the culture and certain kind of terminology without burying them in such heavy dialect that they don't know what's actually happening. So.
Yeah, you're right about that, you know, because Hemingway and some of those authors, you see that English, that British, in some of those British authors. Yeah, that British lingo coming out. Yeah, but I love that though, Juliet. You have been, you know, doing well, and your books, you know, I am hoping that people will get your books even after this podcast. Your website, tell me about your contacts. Tell us about your contacts.
Sure. So I have a website, which is authorjulietrose.com. On that website, there's links to my books, there's links to my social media, my email. There's just some musings. Sometimes if I'm writing something, I'll pop it on there. So it's a great place to kind of get to know me and then contact me further.
Right. I love that. So we get your book through Amazon, right?
Yep, my book's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. I mean, kind of all the different online retailers.
And if we go to this website, Author Juliet, for those persons listening on Apple Podcasts and other audio podcast platform, Author Juliet Rose.com, we can click on a link there to get to your books.
Exactly. Yeah, there's links for, if I know it's on any social media, it's there. So there's links for Amazon, there's links for Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. They can order direct through me through the website as well. If they want, like, say, signed copies or book club copies, they can email me through that site and get a discounted price on bulk orders.
Okay. I love that. Hey, Juliet, it's nice talking to you. And I'm hoping, and I know I'm not hoping that others will, you know, my listeners, my audience will go to your website to get your books and to go on Amazon as well. Juliet Rose, just type in Juliet Rose and you know people, and you will get to her Tell me, Juliet, before we go, do you have a business? What else do you do in terms of a business that promotes your book?
Yeah. So I also have a website, which is abovethebraincollective.com. That is our publishing house. And we branched out this year. So I do freelance editing, proofreading through that. We also have, like I said, 2 books coming out, one from another author and then one anthology. And so that business we're growing at this time as well.
Okay. Juliet, nice to have you on Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. So that was Juliet Rose, and she is an author with a mission, an author who has a mission to change society, change for social justice, and to have you look at social issues, social situations with a different perspective. Get our books now, yeah, and you will not regret it. Just read, and you will be honored to learn more and to have a different perspective of life. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Canute's Exploration.